Before diving into modern tariffs or today's political battles, it helps to rewind to a strange but revealing moment in economic history, a moment that sounds trivial on the surface but quietly shaped decades of trade policy. It starts with chicken. After the Second World War, West Germany began importing large amounts of American chicken. It was cheap, abundant, and quickly became part of everyday life. American farmers were thrilled. Exports were booming, profits were climbing, and one foreign market in particular was absorbing a massive share of US poultry. But success has a way of creating enemies. European farmers felt threatened, squeezed out by lower-priced imports they could not compete with. So the European trade bloc that would later evolve into the European Union responded the way governments often do when domestic pressure builds. They raised tariffs. Overnight, chicken that had been affordable became noticeably more expensive. Imports fell. American farmers were furious, and Washington took it personally. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Today we're diving into how tariffs, once introduced as short-term economic weapons, often spiral into long-lasting policies that raise prices, distort markets, and reshape global power far beyond their original intent. Instead of backing down, the United States decided to retaliate, not by targeting food, but by hitting something symbolic and strategic: trucks. A steep tariff was placed on imported light trucks, many of them German. The effect was immediate and brutal. German truck sales in the US collapsed and never fully recovered. German consumers paid more for chicken. American consumers lost options in the truck market. Both sides claimed victory, but everyone paid a price. This episode quietly became one of the clearest real-world demonstrations of what tariffs actually do. They protect narrow interests, punish consumers, and lock countries into long-lasting economic scars that outlive the original conflict. For decades after that, tariffs slowly faded from the spotlight. Global trade expanded. Supply chains stretched across borders. Tariffs became a niche tool, not a headline policy. That changed dramatically when Donald Trump brought them back to center stage. He framed tariffs as common sense, as economic self-defense, as a way to put national interests first. Supporters saw strength. Critics saw economic nationalism. Either way, tariffs were suddenly back on the table as a primary weapon. To understand how tariffs function in practice, look at what happened when the US placed them on imported washing machines. The mechanics are simple but often misunderstood. The importer pays the tariff to the government, but importers operate on thin margins, so the cost does not stay with them. Prices rise, and consumers pay the difference. That is the point. Higher prices reduce demand for foreign goods and give domestic producers breathing room. But there is a catch. When competition becomes more expensive, domestic producers often raise their prices too. Demand shifts in their direction and they respond accordingly. Even products not directly targeted, like dryers sold alongside washers, rise in price due to changes in buying behavior. There were benefits. New factories opened, jobs were created, tax revenue increased, but the costs were far larger. Consumers paid billions more in higher prices. When economists broke it down, each job created came at an extraordinary cost borne by households across the country. From a purely economic perspective, it was one of the least efficient ways imaginable to create employment. That inefficiency is why economists generally dislike tariffs. There are cheaper, cleaner ways to support workers without distorting entire markets. The same tension appeared with tariffs on steel and aluminum. These were framed partly as a response to unfair trade practices and partly as a matter of national security. Steel is essential, not just for cars and appliances, but for military hardware. Protecting domestic production sounded logical, but steel is also an input for countless industries. When its price rises, manufacturers downstream feel the squeeze. Their costs increase, their competitiveness drops. Studies repeatedly found that while some jobs were protected in steel production, as many or more were lost in industries that relied on steel. The pain simply moved around the economy rather than disappearing. What makes tariffs especially interesting is how difficult they are to remove once implemented. Even administrations that criticize them often leave them in place. Domestic industries grow dependent on the protection. Political leverage becomes attached to them. Tariffs turn into bargaining chips. Removing them unilaterally feels like surrender, even if the original justification no longer applies. That is why decades later, the truck tariff born from a poultry dispute still exists, long after the farmers who inspired it stopped caring. This is where current proposals become controversial. Plans to dramatically expand tariffs across nearly all imports would mark a radical break from recent trade history. Supporters argue this is how the country was built and how it can be rebuilt. Critics warn of higher prices, job losses, retaliation, and trade wars. Studies estimate that broad tariffs would significantly raise household costs and reduce employment, especially once other countries respond in kind. Exports would shrink alongside imports. No major trading partner would quietly absorb such measures without striking back. There is also the idea of using tariffs as a revenue source, replacing some taxes with import duties. On paper, it sounds appealing. Make foreign goods pay, lower domestic taxes. In practice, tariffs generate only a fraction of what income taxes provide, and much of the burden still falls on domestic consumers. Tariffs can raise money, but they are a blunt and unreliable tool for funding a modern government. So why the fixation on tariffs now? Part of the answer lies in China's rise. Over the past 2 decades, China poured massive investment into manufacturing, becoming the world's dominant exporter. State support, scale, and rule bending allowed Chinese goods to flood global markets at extremely low prices. That disrupted industries worldwide and reopened debates that had been dormant for years. Tariffs re-emerged as a way to push back, to punish, to rebalance, or at least to signal resistance. Once that door reopened, trade policy shifted from quiet technical management to a loud geopolitical battleground. The reality is that tariffs are neither pure poison nor magic solutions. In the short term, they almost always hurt economic efficiency. In the long term, outcomes are uncertain and deeply political. They reshape alliances, supply chains, and power dynamics in ways that are difficult to predict. What is clear is that tariffs are not temporary switches. Once flipped, they tend to stay on, shaping economies for generations. History shows that trade wars rarely end cleanly. They escalate, entrench interests, and leave legacies that outlast the leaders who started them. When nations reach for tariffs, they are not just adjusting prices. They are gambling with structure, trust, and long-term stability. It is a high-stakes game of economic chicken, and once both sides accelerate toward each other, backing out becomes the hardest move of all.